Just a quick introduction of our topic. You can see the title is Connecting the Member Experience Enrollment Operations Through Innovation and AI. This is really kind of a second part in the series of webinars that we've been doing on experience as part of Mphasis in our operations, and how we can, this one is really kind of focused on how your back-end operations and the transparency of that can improve the experience for your members. And so we'll talk about some different use cases and examples as we go through the presentation and webinar. So if we can go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the participants here. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Tim Smith. I'm the Vice President of Healthcare Solutions here at Mphasis, and my role is pretty much to watch the industry and look at the different trends that are going on within the industry, look at the technology that's available, try to merge those together to bring different products and create a product portfolio for our clients. My focus in the industry has primarily been in the payer market for around 25 years. With us, we also have Ramesh Gudula and Thomas Thetaputi. They are co-founders of an organization called Cognitive Operations. They're a great match together in that Ramesh has a good bit of experience in, gaining the power of operations within an organization to drive success. Thomas has a good bit of experience and a passion around the user experience. So part of what we're trying to do in this particular is really to put those pieces together to show how the whole experience from a consumer standpoint can be improved. So we're happy to have Ramesh and Thomas join us to help review this topic. We can talk a little bit about the agenda on the next slide. And I'll just go back a little bit and say Thomas and Ramesh both have around 25 years experience as well. They don't have as much gray hair as I do, but they definitely are experienced in the industry. So we're going to talk about the process of making operations strategic, and then show you sort of an example that's around the enrollment process, specifically around how that process can be improved through looking specifically at the design of a product and how individuals interact with technology, as well as how opening up your operations to your members can improve their experience. We'll take some questions at the end, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat at any time, and we'll stop at the end and see what questions we have and try to answer those, and then we'll do just a brief closing where you can find information on who to contact if you have additional questions, need additional information, and we'll get a recorded message out to you, a recording of the webinar out as well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into our next slide. We want the webinar to be educational, but also just to let you know, as Mphasis is putting on the webinar, just a little bit about Mphasis and who we are. Mphasis is a fairly large multinational organization with technology and services across many different verticals. Today, we're focusing on the healthcare. You can see a market cap and revenue in the billions of dollars, as well as our technology badges across consulting partners, AWS, Datatyx. Those are different companies that we work with and provide services through those technologies. There's many more. We have a vast experience in the insurance industry, as well as within the healthcare industry, and we'll talk about some of those things as well. So one of sort of the key things I think that we wanted to mention that I've found impressive about Mphasis is really the founder's mentality. So each individual, looking at moving forward in providing services and technology, and really innovation just through a mentality that everyone is enabled as a founder, and being able to look at innovation and provide that out to different clients. One of the ways that we've organized that, as you can see, through the power of 8, and that's really through taking different capabilities that we find have specific domain experience in grouping together those individuals and then providing those different services out to clients, as well as through different applications that we've began to formalize. So one of the things you may have heard is the term, it takes a village, it takes a tribe here, and those tribes and squads come together to produce different solutions within a particular industry. In the healthcare industry, they've come together, and there's different things that we do to create different solutions. And you can see those have played out across the payer market, the provider market, medical devices, pharmacy, and life sciences. So one of the key areas within those is the experience tribe. And that's kind of what we'll talk a little bit about today. And that is the experience tribe specializes in the user experience. And so using that in combination with the other tribes and other capabilities, driving out with that tribe and squad model to provide different innovation and different products to the different clients that we work with. So a little bit about that of what we do and the experience and how we do it. We can move on to the next slide and talk a little bit more specific on the actual experience itself and how that's done. So one of the things that we are quite good at is transformation. So one of the approaches that we use is called front to back. What front to back is not is kind of that traditional approach where you find an issue that maybe involves operations and technology and rip out the core back systems and, pave a multi-year project that doesn't bring any business value until, year 3 or 4 within that project. What front to back is really starting out on the left side, you can see on this slide, of starting out and seeing how do my customers and stakeholders with an organization interact with technology, right? So how do they engage with technology that's specific to the different operations that they're performing? And those may be individuals that are external entities, internal entities, but really looking at that to see what journey do they go on to perform the different activities that they're working on through the technology. And so the way we do that is to first identify those. And in our last webinar, we went over some of those things using our design thinking process. And once those are identified, then the interactions that are identified, then identifying small chunks of business value that can be interacted in small steps. And so the business value can be brought in very rapidly by looking at how is the user engaged, what engagement layer do they utilize. For instance, is this interaction or intervention need to be something that's on a web portal or on an app or through natural language processing, utilizing interventions into the intelligence layer so that we can provide personalization through analytics to that engagement layer, and then always utilizing the information and data that's within those back-end core systems, but not having to tear those out. And so that allows us to intervene and provide business value in small steps to enable organizations to go through that digital transformation quickly. So that's just a little bit of our strategy and who Mphasis is. And now I'm going to turn this over to Ramesh, who's going to talk a little bit more specifics on, why this is important, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifics in the enrollment area. So Ramesh, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tim. If you go to the next slide, Cecilia. Yeah, the next one. So I think it's a time for us operations leaders, whether we are in the TPA operations or in the payer operations, to actually take the center stage. I think we're always being considered as people working at the back, somewhere back and beyond, backstage, and never considered the center stage, right? And there is an opportunity for operations to be center stage now, but there's a massive need for operations to be at the center stage. As you'll see that the payers and TPAs are impacted with 3 big challenges. which I think needs to be solved. Even though I worked for 20 years or 25 years in operations, my big set of frustration is that we've not been able to solve it. But now with different technologies and cognitive and data, we as operations leaders have the huge opportunity to do that. If we don't do it, you'll see that the customer experience and the member experience is continuously getting impacted, which I think is just not negotiable anymore. Payers have to do it, the TPAs have to do it, whether it is customer member experience or provider experience or employer experience. Not only that, you'll see that it has impacted the risk. We've seen how the lack of operations being center stage has actually massively impacted the risk in terms of millions of dollars as much as costs. So clearly there is this 30 to 40% end-to-end improvement and fundamental change in customer experience, costs, and risk that we can now do. And you'll see the examples on the top, whether it's benefit configuration, whether it's prior authorization, whether it's enrollment, or whether it's claims. All of them really, if you look at all the KPIs out there, the turnaround time, the accuracy is really not the way newer age companies work. And you'll see that in the next slide. Cecilia, can we go to the next slide? What we have to take the center stage, team, and we have to do it in a way that it is surpasses. We can surpass an Amazon, if you will, right? We need to be fast, just fast. For example, Lemonade does 90 seconds to acquire a customer and 3 minutes to pay a claim. Can you imagine if healthcare benefit configuration can be set up in time, real time, as opposed to 60 to 70 days it takes? You can imagine the impact on customer adjudication and from manual to auto adjudication, the impact on provider experience, the impact on customer experiences is just exponential. Thomas and I have done significant projects in this area to demonstrate the downstream impact, if you will, if you make benefit configuration, and it's possible to do that. 100%. If you go back to the previous slide for a minute, Cecilia, you will see everything here is an average turnaround time, average turnaround time, average turnaround time. And if you go to the next slide now, you will see that that is not the language that Amazon uses. Amazon says 99.9% of the goods, of the packages have been delivered before Christmas. But they're not happy because the target is 100%. But can you imagine every claim? So instead of our language being average, can you imagine our language being on time 100%? That's what I'm imagining healthcare to be. Do you know Netflix? And you guys, we are all consumers of Netflix, right? It doesn't think about you as a cohort. It doesn't say this is the sets of people who behave like this, and so let me customize. I mean, they customize it to every individual. For me, they know my movie taste. They know what I need to know. They go beyond from a movie that I'm asking. They exactly give me the rest of the movie that I want. So that they understand the intent, not just the ask. Can you imagine if healthcare does that? Can you imagine, for example, we've done this project where in financial services, if a customer asks for address, there's enough patterns to show the customer needs a bigger house. The customer is going to have a larger family, and the firm that I work with service them accordingly, as opposed to just answer the call and say, I'll change your address. So can you go beyond the ask? And then transparency. Can you imagine how Domino's supports you, gives you the most fun about ordering Domino's is just the pizza and the cheese, but also about this real-time, pizza. Where is my pizza? Where is it in the oven? Where is it in the delivery? And it also gives the name of the employee. Can you imagine if you as a consumer get a saying that Cecilia just processed your claim and she's happy that you're back in action? The whole world changes, right? Now it's not just about some company, some process trying to do this. This Cecilia trying to serve you as a member. So that's where we need to change fast, 100% personalized and transparent. And we can do that as the industry team. And if you go to the last slide for this section.
If I can just add one point here, Ramesh. The previous slide, please, Cecilia. Just to re-emphasize Ramesh's point, I don't think it's a choice anymore, right? In terms of should the operations be fast, personalized, transparent? If you look at any of the digital born healthcare companies that have been doing this for the last couple of years, whether it's Oscar, which personalizes the whole clinical care management, right? If you look at Bright Healthcare, they're looking at personalizing the benefit configuration. So I can pick and choose the kind of benefits that a member wants. So the digital bond companies have already started providing services which are fast, which are digital, served in the channel that the member prefers. It's personalized, and it's always transparent. And so there is absolutely a fork in the road here for the existing, I hate saying this, but legacy payers who've been in business, who have earned the trust of the customers, but seem to be slipping when they're actually pegged against e-commerce companies or even digital born healthcare payers. So I think there is a fork in the road, and there will be a few which most probably will not take it, but the ones that will take it will be the ones which will actually compete in the next 2 decades.
And if you go to the next slide, and you can take it because Thomas and I and some of our work and some of the work we're doing with Mphasis actually shows that you can do it. It's just now possible because of this whole link that you see on the top, which is how can you make your operations from process to customer context, to data, to algorithms, to autonomous, to insights, to personalize to the customer and gain customer empathy. It's very much possible, and we can show you all the examples that we've done on the right. We've done that. We've shown that it's possible, and it's just the whole ability for the payers and TPAs to, for example, for TPAs, I think it's a game-changing opportunity to make experience as the core as opposed to just the cost. The cost, I think, is important. And the more experience you deliver to the employer, the lower your cost. It's a fundamental game-changing paradigm. You don't have to increase experience, you don't have to increase cost. In fact, the way you increase experience is actually reduces the cost. And we can show you enough examples. And now with the TPAs can now gain the center stage as opposed to just a processing organization, and making it very different for the employer and the employees, right? And same goes with the payers. So fundamentally with data and data insights, you can actually change the way workflows happen. Instead of processing and making decisions at every stage, you make the decision at the source of data. It changes the game. We've done that with every process that you've seen in healthcare. Introducing making just a process from saying I'm processing a piece of paper to introducing context and intent, it makes a massive difference. We've seen this, for example, with member service, right? As you see on the right, if the customer is asking for eligibility, yeah, he or she is asking for eligibility and say, am I eligible for this? Am I eligible for this replacement? But really, that's not what the customer is asking. The customer is going through a pain, and therefore he wants to understand about really my eligibility, but what's my costs, what's the nearest doctors. So if you and the teams can, and there's possible, right? There's enough patterns in the data that you can capture from the past, and you can answer this. The customer says, wow, this is a TPA, this is a payer that knows me, not just my ask. If you can adjudicate on current context and past precedents, one of my vision is to have TPAs and payers really free themselves from policies which are always driven by, a hard coding of the organization. As an organization, it cannot be hard coded. It got to be customer coded, if you will. So there's lots of things that you can now do differently that changes claims from processing to actually actions and decisions at the very start of the workflow. And Thomas and Tim will just take you through enrollment, where you actually, instead of 45 days, there's enough data that you can bring in to produce a clean electronic record in very simple ways and very fast. So that's how I'm visualizing healthcare to be not just a processing organization, to become an experience organization. Tim?
Sure. Thanks, Ramesh. So, yeah, what we wanted to do next is to take some of the concepts that we've just talked about and just show a little bit about how those can play out within a technology and within an operational mode. And so we picked enrollment here. And just a quick note, and when we, and Ramesh touched on this, within each organization, whether it's a payer or TPA or, the value of that organization is something specific in the member experience or the experience the member has with your organization. And so, whether it's within operations or within the member experience, all of these solutions that we talk about in our last webinar, we talked about things like provider credentialing and utilizing automated chat bots to interact with members. We've sort of built out what we would call accelerators in those different areas. So, we know that the experience with your members and the experience internal to your operations is very specific. So these are really accelerators to these different areas where we can come in and look at an organization, use the concepts that we talked about from a design thinking standpoint, and then build these directly into your operations and your member experience where that value is. So if you're going to the next slide, we'll kind of talk specifically about why we picked enrollment as one of these areas. And so really when we look at the issues that go on with enrollment, we sort of narrowed those down into 3 different pieces. One is just inaccurate. And obviously when inaccurate data is submitted, then that requires multiple back and forth, errors in further downstream processes, fallouts, and really that also provides a lengthy turnaround time for, someone to go in and enroll, get a quote perhaps, and to get their card and to finish that journey. So from a member experience, that length of time can be quite frustrating. So also for your organization, that can be expensive. So we've talked to organizations who ramp up extensively when, open enrollment occurs. So that can be expensive and further cause problems in the whole experience that a member has. So identifying kind of those 3 different areas, or identifying that those are issues, what are the things that we wanted to do is to kind of look to solve this. And that's a little bit, if you're going to the next slide, we'll talk about how we use technology to go through that.
If I can just add one point,
Tim.
In the previous slide, to Tim's point, there is a reason why we picked this. This is most probably the first moment of truth when the employer, if it's commercial, the employer has an opportunity to see how the payer is actually providing services. The member has also the first interaction with the payer. We've actually seen cases where Jan 1st, somebody needs to pick up, a prescription that could be life-saving sometimes, but they cannot fulfill that prescription because they don't have the new member card that they need, right? And it just needs one such interaction for it to go up to the HR head at the employer's organization to find out that, the payer is slow, hasn't been able to send out all the member cards out. And so it can, even the very first interaction can turn out to be a very unpleasant experience. And so we wanted to start at the beginning of the journey and make sure that using data, using digital apps, and using analytics and AI, how can we make this fast? How can we make this real time?
Yeah, that's a good point, Thomas. And I mean, really, if you look at these different areas, as Thomas mentioned, it really causes when there are problems in this piece, not only does it cause customer dissatisfaction, there's a snowball effect, right? And, if I've got to get a prescription filled on the 1st, I don't have a card, and I go through to get it, it probably will cause some sort of manual intervention or a call to my customer service department. And so, this start of the journey needs to go really smooth. And we saw some opportunities to use technology to assist with that. So if we want to go on to the next slide. So we really identified 3 different areas where these are failure points, if you will. So one is just in the general receipt of those records. And so, whether it's coming from a 834, which we know, a standardized 834, I'm not sure that we can really call it that, but there are lots of different information and a lot of things that come in on the 834 that vary employer group to employer group, system to system. There's proprietary formats. So dealing with that information and making sure that information comes in correct, it's one of the areas that we found as a failure point. And then once you get that information in, there's many fallouts that may occur from address errors, dependency errors, coordination of benefit information, effective data information, product information. So all of that data that can come in and essentially cause a fallout in that enrollment record. That's another area that we found. And then that causes those manual edits, which really not just are manual edits, but really require a human interaction that may be between the payer, the HR department, the member, and that back and forth can be quite timely and does not really provide a great consumer experience when it has to happen based on these errors. So we sort of looked at these three different pieces and looked at how, again, technology can be involved in shortening the process and solving some of the issues that we find here. So if we go on to the next slide, this is really more of an example of what we were, a little bit on the solution, which is really to look and say, okay, in each one of these failure point areas, how can we use technology to assist and provide, really an enrollment as a service capability. So on the front end, the receipt of that information, whether it's proprietary data or an 834, really looking at each one of those provider formats, providing edits on top of that, and utilizing, once that data comes in, data validation, AI edits, which can be applied to that, and machine learning, as well as data aggregators that are within the industry to look at particular data, ensure that it's correct, perform data enrichment, and do those types of activities that normally would take several days and several different possible individuals to work and perform that correction within that enrollment data feed. There's always going to be fallout. There's always going to need to be interaction with humans or HR departments to do things like approvals or to validate that the AI that was used was correct. So we would provide a transient web page for different individuals to, whether it's the HR, the broker, or the group, to look at that data, ensure that it's correct, ensure that the information that was provided from data aggregators or from automation was correct. And then once that data file is complete, then we know that it needs to be consumed by multiple downstream systems, but that they're getting the information that is correct and can be consumed by that third-party back-end system that needs that information. So all of this really kind of streamlines that process. It limits the amount of human intervention that's needed in that step 3 using AI and other processes and data aggregators, and then reduces that kind of back and forth between those entities. And so the goal, if you remember what Ramesh was talking about, speed, 100% satisfaction, and then we'll talk a little bit in a minute on the transparency piece and how the member can have a view of what's going on within all of these different steps.
And if I can just add one point to what Tim was just
The
articulating.
next slide. Yep, go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, look, as you look at the slide and as you see the demo that Tim will show too, you'll recognize that Mphasis is not simply coming in and saying, hey, most probably there's an issue with enrollment. We're going to bring in a team of process experts, let's say technology experts. And by the way, there's this Java .NET developer that you most probably need to bring in and land a whole team. That's usually how services companies have reacted to problems in the payer operations areas. But rather than make it an intellectual exercise or a consulting exercise, what Mphasis is doing here is we have solved the problem almost 70 to 80%. and we're putting it in a box that is flexible, that can be consumed very easily, that can be plugged into payer environments very easily. And it just needs to be configured or tweaked to your environments or your requirements, and it's good to go, right? So as you can see, especially we want to make sure that we are developing very pluggable, plug and play kind of digital apps that use data and analytics in the back end to power and solve for problems in a much more rapid and agile way, rather than saying, a very fancy deck and, a large team to solve some of these problems. And the demo that Tim will show in the next few minutes will actually reiterate what I just said, right?
Yeah, no, thanks, Thomas. That is important, and that's that's kind of what we mentioned before. These are really sort of accelerators. So if this is if enrollment is an issue that brings in, maybe 80% of the capabilities that you need, there may be specific AI edits or integrations that provide the capabilities that are specific to your organization that we would work into this. But that's kind of the approach we take to all of these different areas that we've talked about in the webinars. So if you go on to the next slide, it will give you a little bit more detail specifically in that middle piece. So, one of the things in that, correction of data errors is there's a lot of information that is already aggregated through data aggregators, such as third parties. You've got things like the U.S. Postal Service, Experian, LexisNexis, Facebook, other entities that already have data and APIs, and we've plugged into some of these that can look at the data and provide data enrichment as well as data edits. And so that's one of the things that we've sort of built into the architecture of this. You also have AI edits that can look at things like, is this the correct billing plan, or is there coordination of benefit data that's missing, or email ID. These are just some common things that we found are errors that cause enrollment fallout. You may have others that occur enrollment fallout, and again, that would be different edits that would be applied specific to your enrollment data. And I guess I'm going backwards a little bit, but and then data validity, right? So, is the data accurate at the time that it's come in? So using cognitive tools to be able to ensure that that's the case, and that limits the fallout, increases the speed and the agility of the way those enrollment files get processed. So this is kind of the heart of being able to speed that up and provide a rapid and more efficient operation in terms of enrollment, reducing that turnaround time. And then, as we talked about at the beginning, all of those different things that tend to snowball and cause different problems downstream now are reduced as we increase the turnaround time through the enrollment process, through that operational piece. So, kind of if we look at that, when we've been talking a lot about this back-end process, right? This kind of an enrollment file that's being processed and edits that are being applied to it, speeding up that process from an operational standpoint. That in itself really improves the consumer experience right at the start of their interaction with a particular TPA or a payer. But we also, one of the key things we know that helps with consumer experience is giving the consumer a look into the operations to see, where is my enrollment, where is that occurring? So you can kind of go on to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll show you the demo. So, if you think about it during periods like open enrollment, this is your customer service calls probably go up quite a bit. You probably, unless you're turning around things very quickly, which some organizations are, if you have average turnaround times in HR enrollment, the situation that Thomas talked about earlier, where we've got someone that needs to go to a provider on January 1 or January 2, they don't know where their information is, that leads to frustration. Some people aren't sure if they're even covered. So you've probably experienced that interaction with consumers through those different time periods. So giving consumers a picture into the back end of the operations can really assist with that consumer experience and make that consumer feel a lot better about where their, in this particular case, enrollment application is in the process, as well as an opportunity to interact with that process when it's needed. So we'll really kind of look at two different views here in a moment as we sort of demonstrate the enrollment piece that we have gone through and designed to meet the enrollment process. So I'll just stop there, and I'm going to share my screen, and we'll jump into a sort of a demo of the product. All right. All right, so you should see my screen now. This is a interaction with an enrollment specialist. This may be within an organization that's performing the enrollment process. And you can kind of see they have a dashboard, and so the ability to look at each of the organizations that they're working with, and you can see this is John Smith. You know, this is a experience for John Smith, who's a enrollment specialist, looking at processing enrollment files and ensuring that those enrollment files are brought in correctly. So that's the view from this individual. And so, you know, when we talked a little bit about bringing those files in, for instance, one of the things that, in addition to a dashboard, seeing what files are there, just starting that process out, this individual can go in or would go in and may possibly upload a file. And so, you know, just being able to upload that data, drag a file. So let's say they've gotten a proprietary file or a 2834, something like that, dropping that into the application and then going through and uploading that. And you can see right off the bat in this particular example, this process, this one errored out. And so it didn't meet the syntax errors and the syntax capability in the first. So, you know, getting that file to a point that it can be uploaded into the system, kind of a key piece to speed that up. So working with the company or the organization and getting that enrollment data to ensure that that data is correct. And so, you know, once that information or that data, when I say correct, just simply a file format. So let's say we've gone in and fixed the syntax errors and go ahead and we'll upload this. So as that's uploaded, this is going to go ahead and take those things that would normally require back and forth or, you know, missing data or fallout, and using those data aggregators that we mentioned, call out through those APIs that are involved with those organizations. Things like looking up address validation or information that you can validate from, as I mentioned before, LexisNexis or even Facebook, to validate those errors and to validate that information that's coming in. And so this would reduce a lot of the fallout, and this kind of happens automatically through API calls that are performed with these different organizations. And as we mentioned before, there may be other pieces or other data that you need for data enrichment that can, one of the clients we worked at, they actually had a database where this some of the information they needed on the enrollment book file would be called out and brought in through that system. So that's kind of what's occurring here. And once that's done, you know, that you can see that particular enrollment file is now processed and is in John Smith's dashboard. Now, if you're the individual member, what you may see is that you may get an update. And so this is a different view. This is a view that the member has to say, hey, you know, that enrollment file that you submitted, it's come into the system, it's now approved, and it's going to go through some steps to get done. And we'll continue to let the member know where that enrollment file is in the process. So as John Smith does his work, he can go in and see that this file was updated. And so what he's going to see, due to the AI that was used, that there are, you know, were 9,000 some odd files that were brought in, 75% completed without any problems, but there's a couple that were successful. There's some that had errors on them. And so, you know, this is where this individual could go in and begin to work those. And so as John Smith looks at that, he can see, you know, these are the different individual enrollment files that came in. There was AI that was and data aggregation that was done, but there's a confidence level that may be high or low depending on what the AI and data enrichment that occurred. And so there may be certain levels that are acceptable and certain levels that are not acceptable that would require human intervention. And so, from a sliding scale, I can kind of see what, look at different confidence levels and what AI information was brought in and changed. And you can see here the suggestions and error types that were brought in and who they were brought in from, those data aggregators. And here on this particular file, I can see, for instance, that they were missing the effective date. So I was able to make a determination of what that effective date was, as well as the correct address and who those came from, right? So I was able to look at the effective date, get that data from the payroll system, and I was able to call TransUnion and the U.S. Postal Service to ensure that the address validation was correct. So, because of the confidence level here is pretty high, then I can go through and say, hey, that's something that I want to approve, and go ahead and look at that. And maybe, now as the payer, I may want to send that to the HR manager for them to look at and them to validate that that data is correct. So what I just negated were a whole lot of files that would have dropped out and caused my turnaround time to be a whole lot faster. I reduced the need for human interaction using that AI and those API calls into those data aggregators. Now, in this particular case, when I submitted this, Evelyn, who is with the HR department, Evelyn got an email that said, hey, there's certain files that you need to go in and look at and validate. And so, for instance, this is now Evelyn, the HR manager of this Fast Change Corporation, whose file we loaded. And so now she can go in and begin to look at these different files and approve those. Now the member, go back to the member, where's my card? Where's that information? As these processes have been going along, they've been getting texts to say, hey, your request was submitted. We're looking at this, and we suspect it'll take about 2 days based on the information that was either incorrect or was not included in the initial enrollment file. All right. And then, as we moved on to that next step, they would have gotten a text that said, hey, verification's in process, and now it's set and sent to your HR department, and they can look to review that. At any point in time here, there may have been an interaction that required the member to go in and approve or to include additional information. So that AI is being provided, that back and forth, the view from the operations is now in the hands of the member. Now they're empowered. Now they're not making those calls to the customer service department. They're not nervous about whether they're covered, and their experience is really a whole lot more pleasant than, worrying about where their information is. Now back to the HR manager, they're working the different errors and edits, and they can do things like, see what edits are out there, what was changed, and see the data that's associated with that, see the things that occurred, and make approvals for those and fix those issues and continue on that process. And so this is just allowing them access to that data and being able to view, for instance, what was updated, what was changed, as well as things like, hey, what's the source of that data? Right, so I had a change in address for this individual. What was the actual file transactions that occurred that managed that process? So, all of that has been done in a span of just several days, as opposed to, you can imagine, all the manual back and forth that might have needed to occur for these enrollment files to be completed. Now, if we go back to our member, again, and kind of what they're seeing, and they've gotten this information as it's gone through each one of the steps. And so, they may have got this, that the HR person has this and it's pending approval, and there was a correction that was submitted, and they can go in, for instance, and see, hey, that correction was around my address. Maybe they want to approve that correction, and then sort of moving along to the finalization of that actual enrollment process. So here, maybe it's done, it's gone through all the different processes. They've got a view into the back-end operation. They can see where it was sent to HR, what occurred there, the request has been received, and now they can pick up their ID card. Right. So through all of that process, the member's been engaged, seeing the back end. Where is that information? When can I expect it? And so being able to see that and have that view into the operation, what has that done to the individual? It's improved their experience. It's reduced your operational calls and contacts. It's sped up the process, and not only the speed, but the accuracy of the data. And then again, provided transparency into the back end portion of operations. And so again, this is kind of an accelerator to this process. And what with all of the solutions, there may be differences within an organization where they consider their key value to be a part of their consumer experience. This just sort of gives an architecture for the enrollment process. So, Thomas, you may have something to add, and we'll just pause there and see if there were any questions that came in, or if there are any questions that we want to field as part of the presentation. I'll just stop sharing there. Okay, so we wanted to leave about 10 minutes to see if we had any questions that came in. If you happen to have any, you can leave them there in the chat. You can see that for additional information and additional contacts, you can utilize the information that's on the screen to contact myself or TJ, who is with our organization, and use the email address information there. We will also be able to provide a copy of the webinar and a link. So I'll just kind of see, I don't see any questions in the chat so far. Okay, so unless I'm missing something, I don't see any questions. I'll just again pause for 1 second and see if there's any additional comments from my colleagues here, Thomas and Ramesh. All right. We'll wrap up the webinar then, and we appreciate your time that you spent with us. I hope it was helpful and educational. And again, you can reach out at any point in time if you have any additional questions or want to talk about how we can help you with the user experience through, and as well as operational experience within your organization.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Tim. I think it was, the way we're visualizing this is that all operations are now helping the associates. So it's unlocking the human potential in the TPA operations or in the payer operations with AI and data-led. Actually, it helps the employees of these organizations, become center stage, as opposed to just keep processing. Now they're getting more value-added support from AI. And then you'll see that it's reflected in the customer experience, that it's more real-time, it's more hours. These are replicable, verifications that the associates would like it to be automated as opposed to them trying to do everything. So I think there's a massive unlocking of human potential here. There's a massive unlocking of the customer experience potential. And obviously, there's also a massive unlocking of cost and risk advantage, if you will. So all three are activated significantly for payer operations and TP operations to go center stage. So thank you so much.